Welcome to another episode of Around the Table with Powerful Women. I'm Joy Caffrey.
I'm Christi Daniels.
And I'm Wendy Love Edge.
And we are here today with Sue Coppernoll. And I am delighted to be having this conversation. I know it's going to be stimulating and intriguing. Sue has a varied background. I know she was a military brat and has lived all over the country. And what's even more exciting is how many different things she has done. So I met her in a writing group, so I know that she is a writer and she's currently working on a book. I know that she's been a counselor, but she's also been an administrator of Planned Parenthood and a child abuse prevention, and was it the YWCA? And one of the things in particular that I'd love to stimulate conversation about is women speaking up, speaking out. As Sue says, I want to quote something that she has said, that she is passionate about being an encouraging force for women to speak up, speak out, speak the truth, and bring power and love into the world. Let's kick it off with that.
I think anyone who is female in our society, even up until 2000, has been in some way instructed to speak softly. Every time an aunt of mine said goodbye to me, even up into my 70th year, she would say, "Now you be sweet, Susie." Well, being sweet kind of limits our speech and the topics of our speech.
What we're allowed to say and how we say it.
So it really doesn't matter what your race or even your economic status is. You have your own strictures about what's polite, what's acceptable, and what men can enunciate and what we are to clean up a little before we speak it. So that was my first learning, and I learned it in my entire upbringing, and then from every woman that I've met, that I know, that I worked with. There were some, and many of them are so ingrained and unconscious that we don't challenge them. I find them every once in a while. So that seems to me to be the beginning. And then along about, it used to be middle school or freshman in high school, but now it's starting in 4th grade. The whole two things, mean girls and competition for attention from men. Already in 5th grade, you're competing for who's got the best dress and a boyfriend to go to the dance.
And has that changed? I think that's how it's been all along, right?
Yes.
Or what? Tell me. I'm kind of curious about what you've seen over the decades of change, and what you're hoping to see. Yeah.
Okay, then in the 60s, the mid-60s, I was the mother of 5 late adolescents. Okay, they were like 14, 15, 16, 17.
Oh my goodness.
Close succession.
Whoa.
And a 12-year-old. And I became empowered by a woman who hired me as executive director of a Planned Parenthood clinic in southern Iowa. And my response, having had 5 children in 6 years, was, "You're out of your mind. I've never even seen a diaphragm." But because of Annis's offer of this job, and the women that I met in administering Planned Parenthood, I became very aware of the feminist movement, and that's when I began to be concerned that when we find our voices and we can speak, we have to use wisdom in how we speak, to whom, at what moment. I'll give you one example, which is kind of silly, but it happened. Do any of you, so much younger than I, remember bra burning?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I remember
okay,
bra
heard of
burning.
it.
Do you remember bra burning?
No.
Was
Okay.
it an East Coast phenomenon? I don't know.
Oh, bra burning.
Bra burning. Bra
Okay.
burning.
So in the Northeast we say brar. And I didn't know what you were
we
saying.
add ours and take them out. Bra burning.
right.
Yeah, bra burning.
You've lost you're not doing that.
And I lost. I took out my
So
own.
bra burning.
Bra
burning.
Yeah, bra
Okay.
burning.
Oh yeah.
I watched hundreds of women take to the streets, build small bonfires, quite in acting like men who had burned their draft cards
Right.
for the Vietnam War. And so they either, I don't think in America they took them off. They did in my friend's country of the Netherlands. They just take everything off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depended on your area.
But
and
I
community.
watched them do this symbolic burning and yelling and jumping up and down, and what resulted was an opportunity for all kinds of people to laugh at and put down the feminist movement. That energy, it was a statement, but it wasn't made coherently. It wasn't made from issuance of words in an attempt to get understanding. And it was about 5 years after that that I was a keynoter at a sexuality seminar at the University of Oklahoma when I spoke to the women law students. And the next morning, the headline of the student newspaper was, "Coppernoll says, until I make my brother understand." And we don't make people understand by dramatic acts which cannot be connected.
Acts of rebellion.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
you're right.
I think maybe what was missing was helping people to find the connection with these women, the human connection. That's what I see today. That people, I think I posted something on social media to that effect today. Did you forget we're all human? You know, and when you find that human connection with whatever it is you're trying to change, that's when the minds start to change, I feel. And maybe by just that act of rebellion, which is a beautiful act of rebellion, really, because the bra itself is damaging even to women, you know. But maybe that human piece wasn't quite there, the connection.
It was okay, the philosophy and the need for freedom that was being expressed got lost in the absence of creating understanding. Which that's why
Sometimes we have competing needs, right? The need for freedom and
Yes.
maybe more autonomy or empowerment, and the need for understanding and compassion and connection.
in the years that I did a lot of work with women in the 80s. You remember the 80s when we wore men-tailored clothes
Yeah.
and ties?
Shoulder pads.
Yeah, right.
And, oh, those things are so
Yeah.
okay. But when I worked with women who had their education, whatever, you know, nursing administrators, whatever, they were still using, in the main, soft-spoken equivocation in the business world. And they were getting nowhere. They were not saying, I've just reviewed my last year's work and I deserve a raise. They were saying, oh, hi, I just wondered if maybe raises were going to be given this year. So here's one of my mantras, and I'll give you one other example. Women say the damnedest thing in the sweetest tone of voice.
Well, you were taught to be sweet. You told us in the beginning you were taught to be sweet.
Yes.
We're taught to be that way, you know. And if we're not, then they attach other words to us, you know,
Right.
the one that begins with a B.
The B.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
So then I encountered, not because I wanted to, but because it's what women brought into my arena for my services. I encountered women who, more than a few, who had packed up their bags, called the sheriff to serve divorce papers on their husbands at his work, which was a pretty humiliating kind of thing, and the husbands swore, because they always came then to my office to say, what did I do wrong, and can you keep my wife at her, and blah, blah. Anyway, they always, the husbands could honestly say, but I didn't know anything was wrong, or I didn't know how unhappy she was, or I didn't have any idea. So they were left in shock, dismay, all sorts of games. So it's the women had given them many messages, of course, emotional, but we had been taught by watching our parents and their peers, when we wanted to get a message across to our husbands, we used punishment. Withdrawal, you know, ancient theater about withdrawing sex. We had been taught to give an emotional message. But the men were not on our emotional wavelengths.
Right.
So they weren't receiving it.
Yeah, so we have a mismatch of understanding going on. Or yeah.
So there I was. I think she did tell you. I think there were some.
There were clues.
And are you saying it meekly like I think, or saying she told you?
However,
Yeah.
after I had been married for 35 years, as a result of those encounters, we were driving from Mount Pleasant, Iowa to Dubuque, and my husband said, would you like me to get overnight reservations at this resort for after my family reunion so that we could have, you know, a nice weekend? And I said no. The first time in 35 years that I did not embroider, I did not explain, but that one word got his attention. And he said, but I thought you liked that resort. Well, we can play golf. I didn't want to play golf. So I said, no, I didn't mean no about the resort. I meant I'm not ever going to one of your family reunions again.
I think it's true, you know, learning to speak up. You know, we find our voices and understanding, I think, later, you know, 50s and beyond, because earlier than that, we're so conditioned to act like a lady, you know, use your quiet voice.
We feel like there's so much at stake to lose if we actually speak out truth.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're
Right.
excluded from
Yeah.
whatever tribe
Yeah.
there is, you know, that's the worst.
And there are consequences.
Right. Yeah.
I've
That's what we're
never
saying.
coached a woman to use her voice, because in the process that I was engaged in, most of them had found they had a voice, or they wouldn't have come to me and spoken.
Right, just to seek you out.
Yes, they had found their voice for some time and place, but they were not using it effectively. And I did everything from, I owned an album for career women of tapes for using their full power and being effective. to having workshops. Well, let me give you one example. I ran into in both doing workshops for women attorneys and particularly in the nursing profession. And the topics would be given by the administration. I was there. One was called Competence and Caring for Nurse, the balance. But we'd be at a table around like this, and they'd come in and sit down, and I would ask people to introduce themselves. And inevitably, even with a new attorney who had passed the bar, one of the women would say, well, my name is Sarah Jones, and I'm just a junior partner at the firm. Or,
That word "just"
my
is a
name
lot.
is Hilda Jones, and I'm just a CNA. You know who does all the work in nursing?
Oh, I know, the CNAs,
So,
right,
Would
right.
you stand up and let me act this out?
Yes, I will.
I would go over to the person and say, how do you do, Justa? It's so good to have
Just
Yeah.
and
When I was a little girl, I want to give a little story. And here's the story. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and we were in this department store, and they had a snack bar, and the moms would be getting their haircuts, and kids could wander around. And I went up to a counter, and I literally just stuck my head over it, and I said, "Can I have just a glass of water?" And that woman was so cool. She was like, "You cannot have just a glass of water. You can have a glass of water." And I that stuck with me.
yes,
She said it so strong to me, and
Yes.
yeah, I'm really happy.
We taught
she
to
did.
minimize ourselves.
Yeah.
To elevate those around us, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking as I'm hearing you talk, if you've been taught since you're a baby to quiet down and diminish, it's got to be awkward to learn to use your voice, right?
is.
It's
And
a process.
Yeah. I want to throw something out into it, right? I know this was going around on Facebook a couple of years ago, but when women do speak, they get ignored also. I remember being in a group, a circle, that mixed gender, and someone said what time it was. A woman instantly answered, and nobody responded. You know, and then a few seconds later, a man looked at his watch and responded, and now all of a sudden the time was what it was. And so I want to counter those two different things. Like, we're taught not to speak up, and when we do speak up, it doesn't always recognize.
There
So
are-
I want to speak to that a little bit, that conundrum of,
Yeah.
and there are consequences. I had one of the most intriguing and ridiculous experiences when I owned my own consulting firm, Crossroads Change Management, in the 90s, and I became the first woman invited to Oregon, Illinois Rotary Club. I didn't have much money. In fact, the bank refused to give me a loan, though my husband had gone on signature loans for years. But every single month for 3 years in the Oregon Rotary Club, and there was another woman who had come along at that point in time, I put aside $100 until I got 1,000. And when I had $1,000, I gave it to the secretary of the Rotary Club as my contribution to the Paul Harris Fellowship. They are the organization which said they had eradicated polio, they had dug wells around the world, blah, blah, blah. In the Rotary Club, in the only one I was ever a part of, when you were a Paul Harris Fellow, you received a ribbon with a medal. And the men always wore those ribbons and medals to fancy affairs. So I didn't hear anything from my donation at all. There was no time scheduled to do what was always done, which was have the person come up front and give them a... But one day I went home from my work 5 miles away, and there was a box in my mailbox. They had mailed my medal to my home address. to keep any form of acknowledgement being given to a woman.
Wow.
So I ripped it open, and again, trying to stay in a place of wisdom, along with anger and absolute amazement. Why did that matter so much to 25 lawyers and dentists and ministers? And so I packed it back up in the box. I went to the office of the president of Rotary and said, "This is yours. I have written an article for the International Rotary magazine, which I will not mail if I get a notice at the club that next week I will be honored with the Paul Harris Fellowship Medal. I will not discuss this with anyone. I have no need, but I will not allow you to set a precedent as more women become Rotarians." So next week, I don't know who made that decision. Maybe it was the guy that got my check for $1,000, but the next week I put on a white suit with my red shirt, went to the club, had my husband there and some of my other Rotarian female friends from around the area, and they went through the charade of presenting it to me, including a picture in the paper.
Nice.
What would you like to say to other women, like in terms of using their voice? How would you like to inspire, or what message of wisdom? And do you have something else to ask?
Could I ask you to hold that?
Sure,
for
sure.
just a second?
Go ahead.
Because
Go
I want to
backwards.
unpack what just happened.
Yeah, sure,
in your
sure.
short story.
Yeah.
So it was action.
Yes.
So the wisdom that you had in you prompted you to write a letter and to have that action play out, either the mailing of the letter to the article or the presentation. It was a boundary.
Well, you see, I had learned that words matter. And I knew that the one thing, even in Oregon, Illinois, the establishment males would not want those words released into the ether. Words matter. Remember, I was once upon a time in ministry.
I don't know if I mentioned that, but you were also, I know there's a lot of things I could have mentioned.
The
Yeah.
only scripture that remains in my mind every day is, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Words matter. So, first there's the finding that you have a voice. Then there has to be a supportive community of whatever kind that honors your voice, where you can speak it in permission to speak, protection while speaking, and the potency of other women who model speaking. When you have that, you find ways to rehearse. And journaling is a wonderful way to write down how pissed you are, the consequences if I speak, and how can I speak and be heard. That's the important thing. So you rehearse that in the journal. You rehearse it, as I did this morning for an hour and a half with my friend Teresa, another subject. And then you must be committed to being aware of the strictures, or, all of this learning. You have to be aware that you can tamp yourself down. And you can go in and say, "I need to talk to you, but I see you're busy." You be aware of the strictures. You take responsibility for the consequences, and your spoken word will be effective. Because there's something about speaking from a place of peace within and love rather than leftover anger, bitterness, or any form of hate. That when that is spoken, things change.
And spoken from a place of sovereignty.
Exactly.
Right? As you're speaking of it, what I'm feeling next to you is the sovereignty with which you speak it. And that's part of that owning the consequences. Right.
And there has never, never and always are supposed to be out of my vocabulary.
Tossed.
There have been few times in recorded history that wise voices, authentic voices of women are more needed. This is a time in which building bridges between those of us who are traditionally Christian and those of us who have other forms, between women of color and white people, building bridges so that what we can enunciate clearly literally can just bowl them over. They are one example of the president of Right to Life in a small town in Iowa came to my office and was when I was still with Planned Parenthood and was very upset, and she found out how terrible we were, and we weren't, because we weren't anywhere near, well, abortion wasn't yet legal. So anyway, she sat down and I listened, and I gave her the points at which we both cared deeply.
That connection you're talking about, right? That human connection.
And yes, and I gave her factual accounts of women whose hands I had held during abortion procedure. I gave her my experience of having a young woman come to me trying to resolve a dilemma, who couldn't make up her mind about what she should do about a pregnancy. And she asked me if I would pray with her. So of course I would pray with her. So she knelt down at her chair, and I knelt down at my office chair. And I prayed for her to make a wise decision. Excuse me. She said, "Thank you. I know I can't do that." And then within a matter of days, her circumstances hit her like a Mack truck, and she did in fact have the abortion. But I had no place in advising her anything to do. I simply shared as carefully and lovingly as I could what her alternatives were, and meant it when I said, now that we have prayed together, I trust that your decision will be the right one for you. But by no, so
You met her where she needed
Where
you to
she
meet
was.
her, right?
where she was.
And so what was the outcome of the Right to Life woman who you were sharing these?
Oh, she and I went together to the local Kiwanis Club and shared how we had become colleagues and friends to the degree that we could, and got a standing ovation from the men. Finally, they heard our words. But remember,
And your willingness to be open to each other. Right? Her willingness to listen to you and your willingness to listen to her.
but that process was difficult. And even if we had been able to be more collaborative and less judgmental, and had not been able to speak our words to that particular small town establishment, male, organization, a lot of it would not have been as of great worth. We had to speak it aloud together. Okay, so we pay attention to our early learning. We discover, however we do it, that we have a voice. Do we just find that out? Then we find places where, again, we are safe, protected, and encouraged. At that point, most of us in today's world have to decide, what is my message? What is most important to me? What will I prepare? What is my audience that needs my words most? And how are they best to be reached? And I found out, and I'm being very personal, but I found out 2018 downtown at Stage 18.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
That you
When
had,
my poetry was made into a staged reading with professional actors and Jorian Lee did the soundscape, I found out that those words had a tremendous impact on men.
I was in the
They're
audience.
still there.
Right.
They were.
Yeah.
Some were crying because they hadn't honored their own mother's struggles. Some were. I don't
It
know.
was beautifully read, right? So her work was read, right? Were you
Right.
there too, or no?
I actually was not there, but
Yeah.
I'm friends with Jules Taylor, and
Right,
I was.
yeah.
She had put
I
the
forget
whole
why I
thing
couldn't
together.
attend, unfortunately, but
So
yeah.
my I no longer. I haven't done this sort of thing in quite a while, but I no longer engage in dialogue with the audiences that I did in the past. For example, I am no longer a Rotarian. I was out of there as soon as I managed their angel ball, convinced them to wear a tux instead of their jeans. I no longer am a Christian minister. I am in ministry, but I do not lend my energy to the current directions from the United Methodist Church, about to split itself again. When I was 15, I went to a United Methodist college named Andrew for the bishop that split the church from Methodist Episcopal North to Methodist Episcopal South, and it didn't get reunited until the 1950s. And now they're doing it.
You're doing it again. You're just watching history repeat itself.
Right. Yeah.
And
My
I can
goodness.
see how much you're very discerning with where you're directing your energy.
That's
Where,
an
that
important
it's
thing
aligning
to
with
learn.
your values. And unfortunately, I would love to have you here for another hour
Yeah.
to talk, but I know that we're coming
We're
to
actually-
the close.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could go back to your question.
Yeah, well, I think she's starting to answer that. Like, if there's anything you can encourage women to do, what I was hearing was to find their voice, right? To
Find your tribe.
find your tribe, right? And so be able to say it in a place where you know that you will be heard and received. You will be protected by your tribe. That
Right.
protection is really interesting.
And know
And what you want to say, right?
your passion.
Know your passion. Know your
See,
message.
When Joy asked me to do this, she asked if I had a particular topic or theme that I might like to engage. And now I don't even remember what I said. But I
Right.
do know that I woke up at 5:30 the next morning.
Yeah, and you sent me a new email. This is what I want to say.
And I knew that my passion had always been, since I was an 11-year-old in high school who answered my 15-year-old classmate's question, "Have I gone all the way?" by showing her the materials my father, the Air Force officer of education, used to train guys in using a condom.
Okay.
I had always been the person who wanted other women, other girls, other people on the edge to have the support, the education,
Right.
and the words that they needed. What that young woman, and what she needed was the ability to say, oh, thank God, no, I don't want to do that yet. And that was, again, it was her decision. But we have to speak. One of the things in a recent study on integrity that I found,
Yeah.
I can run away from nothing again ever. So
Yeah.
when I'm supposed to speak, I will speak.
Yeah. Well, we're at the end of our 30 minutes. And so I want to thank you so much for joining us. And as Christi said, I know that there was so many more aspects in your bio here of things that you've done and wisdom that you've attained. And maybe we'll have to have you back again.
Yeah, that would be fun. How can people get in touch with you?
Okay, I just found one of these. This is what I have done in the last 8 years since I moved here. Infrequently, but with great joy. It's Sue Coppernoll, Interfaith Minister, Ceremonies and Celebrations.
Oh, nice.
For example, I have done house blessings. Had I known you were moving here, I would love to have been a part of blessing the new studio and all of that. I have done probably...
We're going to have to wrap up because
Yeah.
we're
So
at
do you want me to read off your email address?
I can do
Yes.
that, yeah.
Sure. So it's Starburst without the U.
That's-
STARBRST at cox.net. Sue Coppernoll, Interfaith Ministries. I love that.
And you can also catch her on Facebook, and we'll put those links on the in the episode notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So-
Sue, for being
Yeah,
here.
thank you for speaking up.
I will be sending the link to every woman I have met in Northwest Arkansas that they can see your podcasts.
Oh,
Aw,
nice.
sweet, thank you.
Well,
Nice.
they're
Thank you.
needed. Any avenue for speaking our truth.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Do you want to
for
do our
sharing.
That little toast.
Here's to a soulful,
joyful, and edgy life. Thank you for watching. Come join another episode.